She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Margaret Chen Whitfield simply stood in the parking lot at 6 a.m., her nursing shoes still wet from mopping a dying man's room, and read the text message that erased 28 years of marriage in 11 words. Don't come home. Jessica's moving in. Get your stuff Saturday. She was 54. She had $43, and the man she'd sacrificed everything for had just stolen the only thing she had left. But what Richard Brennan didn't know, what nobody knew, was that a letter had arrived yesterday, and it was about to flip his entire world upside down. If you want to see how a woman they called worthless became the most powerful person in the room, subscribe now and stay until the end. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far Margaret's story travels. The fluorescent lights of Sunrise Senior Living flickered the way they always did at 5:47 a.m. Margaret Chen Whitfield knew that flicker by heart. She'd worked the night shift for 11 years, and those lights had blinked at her through every holiday, every anniversary, every birthday her husband forgot. She finished charting Mr. Henderson's vitals and checked on Mrs. Patterson in room 112. The old woman was sleeping peacefully, her breath shallow but steady. Margaret adjusted her blanket, tucked it around her thin shoulders, and whispered good night, even though morning was breaking outside. That was Margaret, always caring for everyone else, always invisible. She grabbed her bag from the break room, the same faded canvas tote she'd carried for 15 years. Her coworker, Dina, was already clocking in. "Long night?" Dina asked. "Mr. Henderson had a rough one, but he's stable now." "You look exhausted, Maggie." Margaret winced at the nickname. She hated it. Rick had started calling her that on their second date, said Margaret sounded too formal, too Chinese. She'd never corrected him. She'd never corrected anyone. "I'm fine," Margaret said. "See you tonight." She walked out into the cold March air and pulled out her phone to check the time. That's when she saw it. The notification that would shatter everything. One text message from Richard Brennan, her husband of 28 years. "Don't come home. Jessica's moving in. Get your stuff Saturday." Margaret read it 3 times. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She waited for more, an explanation, an apology, something. The message stayed frozen. 11 words. 28 years reduced to 11 words. She called him. It rang once and went to voicemail. She called again. Same thing. The third time, a woman answered, young, annoyed. "Rick's in the shower. Who is this?" Margaret's throat closed. "I'm his wife." A pause. Then a laugh, light and dismissive. "Oh, you're Maggie. Look, he told me you two were basically separated. He said you'd call. He doesn't want to talk to you. Just get your things on Saturday, okay? Before noon. We have brunch plans." The line went dead. Margaret stood in the parking lot. The sun was rising, painting everything gold. But she couldn't feel its warmth. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold. She opened her banking app. Her fingers trembled as she typed in her password. The checking account showed $43.67. That was wrong. That had to be wrong. She had $127,000 in savings. 28 years of overtime shifts, of skipping lunches, of wearing the same shoes until holes formed. That money was for her mother's care, for emergencies, for the future Rick always promised was coming. She scrolled to the savings account. $0. Transfer completed. March 3rd. $127,000 moved to joint account. She checked the joint account. $0. Transfer completed. March 4th. $127,000 moved to account ending in 7749. She didn't recognize that account number. It wasn't hers. Margaret's knees buckled. She grabbed the side mirror of her old Honda Civic, the same car she'd driven for 19 years because Rick said the dealership needed all their capital. She'd believed him. She'd always believed him. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Rick. "Don't be dramatic. You'll land on your feet. You always do. P.S. I need you to sign the papers by Friday, or I'll have to get lawyers involved. Let's keep this clean." Clean. He wanted to keep it clean. She'd given him everything. Her savings, her 20s, 30s, 40s, her dream of becoming a nurse practitioner, abandoned when he said the dealership needed her to work weekends answering phones. Her relationship with friends who'd stopped calling years ago because Rick always found reasons to skip their dinners. And now, at 54 years old, she had nothing. Margaret drove to the dealership. She didn't know why. Maybe she needed to see his face. Maybe she needed to hear him say it out loud. Needed him to have the courage to end 28 years with more than a text message. Brennan Auto Group occupied a full city block. 5 dealerships now, all gleaming glass and American flags. Rick's face smiled down from a billboard. The Brennan Promise. Family values, family prices. She parked in the customer lot and walked through the front doors. The receptionist, a young woman Margaret didn't recognize, looked up with a practiced smile. "Welcome to Brennan Chevrolet. Are you here for service or sales?" "I need to see Richard Brennan." "Do you have an appointment?" "I'm his wife." The smile faltered. "Oh, let me just—" She picked up the phone, whispered something, and hung up. "He'll be right out." Margaret waited. Around her, salesmen in khaki pants and blue polos moved between customers. She recognized some of them. They recognized her, too. They looked away. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, Rick emerged from the back office. He wasn't alone. Beside him walked a woman Margaret had seen in photos on his phone. Photos he'd claimed were from a marketing meeting. Jessica Lane, 34 years old, blonde hair, tight dress, heels that clicked on the showroom floor like a countdown. Rick stopped 10 feet away. He didn't come closer. He was wearing the Rolex she'd bought him for their 25th anniversary. She'd taken double shifts for 6 months to afford it. "Maggie, I told you not to come here." "You sent me a text, Rick. A text." "I thought it was cleaner, less emotional." 28 years. You ended 28 years with a text? Jessica rolled her eyes and pulled out her phone, already bored. "What did you want, Maggie? A ceremony?" Rick crossed his arms. "We've been done for years. You know it. I know it." "I didn't know it." "Then you weren't paying attention." A salesman walked past, pretending not to listen. Margaret felt the heat rising in her face. People were watching now. The receptionist, the finance manager, customers browsing the Silverados. "Where's my money, Rick?" "Your money?" He laughed. It was a sound she used to love. Now it scraped against her like sandpaper. "That was our money, Maggie, and I needed it for the business. That was my savings. 28 years of 28 years of living in my house, driving cars from my lot, eating food I paid for." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You contributed what, exactly? Some filing? Answering phones? You think that's worth 6 figures?" Margaret felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, crack, like ice before it gives way. "I gave up nursing school for you." "That was your choice." "I worked 60-hour weeks so you could open the second dealership." "And I appreciated it." Past tense. "I raised our son while you—" "Danny's grown. He doesn't need you smothering him anymore. Rick glanced at Jessica, who was now examining her nails. Look, I don't want to do this here. You're embarrassing yourself. I'm embarrassing myself? You're standing in my showroom, causing a scene. This is my business, Maggie, my reputation. I can't have my ex-wife screaming at me in front of customers. I haven't raised my voice once. Your presence is enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted 5 20s and held them out to her. Here, take this. Get a hotel room. Get yourself cleaned up. I'll have someone pack your things and drop them off wherever you end up. Margaret looked at the money. $100. He was offering her $100. Rick, take it, Maggie. It's more than you deserve. Jessica finally looked up from her phone. Babe, we're going to be late for the thing. 1 second. Rick pushed the money toward Margaret again. Take it, and don't come back here. If you make trouble, I'll get a restraining order. I know people, Maggie. Lawyers, judges. Don't test me. Margaret's hand moved before her brain could stop it. She took the money. She didn't know why. Maybe because fighting felt impossible. Maybe because 28 years of saying yes had rewired her nervous system. Rick smiled. That salesman smile. Good girl. See? That wasn't so hard. He turned and walked away, Jessica's arm threading through his. They were laughing about something before they even reached his office. The door closed behind them. Margaret stood in the middle of the showroom, holding $100 that smelled like leather and betrayal. A salesman approached. She recognized him, Tommy Garza. He'd been there almost as long as she had. He looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Brennan? I'm sorry, but Mr. Brennan asked me to escort you out. Margaret looked at him. Tommy was 43. She'd attended his daughter's quinceañera. She'd brought a gift. It's okay, Tommy, she said quietly. I'm leaving. She walked out into the parking lot. The sun was fully up now, harsh and unforgiving. She got into her Honda, the one with 187,000 miles on it. The one Rick had refused to replace because it still runs, doesn't it? She sat behind the wheel and finally, for the first time that morning, she let herself feel it. The tears came slowly at first, then faster. She sobbed until her chest ached, until her throat was raw, until the $100 bills in her hand were damp with salt. 28 years. Gone. Just like that. She was 54 years old. She had no job after tonight. She'd already submitted her vacation request for the week, planning to use it for the surprise anniversary trip Rick had hinted at. She had no savings. She had no home. Her son lived in Seattle and hadn't called in 3 months. And her mother. Oh, God. Her mother. Victoria Chen was in room 203 of Sunrise Senior Living. Private room. Premium care package. $8,400 a month. Margaret had been paying it directly from her savings. Now she had nothing. Margaret started the car and drove to the one place she still belonged. The nursing home was quiet in the morning hours. The day shift was just settling in, the smell of breakfast trays filling the hallways. Margaret walked past the reception desk, nodded at the charge nurse, and made her way to room 203. Her mother was sitting up in bed, staring out the window. Victoria Chen was 78 years old, her hair white as snow, her eyes still sharp on good days. Today seemed like a good day. Her gaze was focused, present. Mom? Victoria turned. A smile broke across her face, genuine, warm. The smile Margaret had chased her whole life. Margaret. My Margaret. You look tired. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed and took her mother's hand. The skin was thin, papery, but the grip was still strong. "Long night. You work too hard. You always work too hard." Victoria squeezed her hand. "That husband of yours doesn't appreciate you." Margaret almost laughed. Even with the Alzheimer's creeping in, her mother could still see what Margaret had been blind to. "Mom, Rick and I are getting divorced." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded, slowly, as if this was information she'd been expecting. "Good." "Good? He never deserved you, Margaret. I told you that at your wedding. Do you remember? I took you aside and I said, 'That man looks at you like you're furniture.' But you loved him. You wanted to believe." Margaret remembered. She'd dismissed it as her mother being overprotective. Maybe a little bit of old-fashioned Chinese skepticism about American men. "I'm sorry, Mom." "Don't be sorry. Be free." Victoria's eyes drifted toward the window again. Her grip loosened slightly. "Your father used to say—" She trailed off. The lucidity was fading. Margaret could see it happening, the light in her mother's eyes dimming like a bulb on a timer. "What did he say, Mom? My father?" Victoria frowned. "Your father? I don't— Which one?" Margaret's heart stuttered. "What do you mean, which one?" But Victoria was gone again, lost somewhere in the fog of her own memories. She started humming a song Margaret didn't recognize, something in Cantonese, something from another lifetime. Margaret sat with her for an hour, holding her hand, watching her sleep. The business office opened at 9. She would have to talk to them. She would have to explain that the payments would be late, or missing, or— God, she didn't know. At 9:15, she walked to the administrative wing and knocked on the door marked Billing and Accounts. A woman named Patricia looked up from her computer. She was around Margaret's age, with reading glasses perched on her nose and a coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Accountant." "Mrs. Brennan, what can I do for you?" "I need to talk about my mother's account." Patricia typed something into her computer. Her expression shifted, subtle, but Margaret caught it. A flicker of something. Pity? Concern? "Actually, I was going to call you this afternoon. There's a flag on the account." "A flag?" "The last 3 payments bounced. We tried the backup card on file, but it was declined as well." Margaret's stomach dropped. Rick. Rick had already canceled everything. I can explain. There's been a situation with my husband. Mrs. Brennan, I'm not unsympathetic, but the facility requires payment within 30 days of service. You're currently 47 days overdue." 47 days? That's impossible. I made a payment last month. It was reversed. Bank error, they said. The account it came from was closed. He'd been planning this. Rick had been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. "What happens now?" Margaret asked, though she already knew. Patricia removed her glasses and set them on the desk. "If payment isn't received by the end of the week, we'll have to move your mother to our shared facility. It's not as private, but it's covered by her Medicare." The shared facility. Margaret had seen it. 4 beds to a room, overworked staff, residents parked in wheelchairs in the hallway because there weren't enough aides to help them. "Please, give me 2 weeks. I'll figure something out." "I can give you until Friday. After that, it's out of my hands." Margaret nodded. She didn't trust her voice. She walked out of the office and down the hallway toward the exit. Her chest felt hollow. Friday. She had until Friday to come up with $8,400, plus the $16,800 she already owed. $25,200. She had $43. She pushed open the front doors and stepped into the parking lot. That's when she saw her. A woman was leaning against a silver Mercedes, parked directly behind Margaret's Honda. She was older, maybe mid-60s, with silver hair cut short and sharp. She wore a gray pantsuit that looked like it cost more than Margaret's car. Her eyes were locked on Margaret with an intensity that made her stop walking. "Margaret Chen?" Margaret hesitated. "Do I know you?" The woman pushed off the car and walked toward her. Her movements were deliberate, measured, a lawyer's walk, a predator's walk. "My name is Eleanor Blackwood. I was a friend of your mother's, a long time ago." "My mother doesn't have any friends named Eleanor." "She did, before you were born, before Victoria became Victoria." Eleanor stopped 3 feet away. "I've been looking for you for a very long time, Margaret." "I don't understand." "Your mother worked for a family in Newport, Rhode Island, the Whitfield family. Do you know that name?" Margaret shook her head. "You should. Theodore Whitfield III died 2 weeks ago. He was one of the wealthiest men in New England." Eleanor paused. "He was also your father." The world tilted. "That's impossible. My father left before I was born. He was some guy my mom met at a restaurant. He was the heir to Whitfield Properties. Hotels, commercial real estate, shipping, a $4 billion empire." Eleanor reached into her jacket and pulled out an envelope. "And according to his will, which was unsealed yesterday, you are his sole living heir." Margaret stared at the envelope. It had her name on it. Not Margaret Brennan, not Maggie. Margaret Chen Whitfield. "I don't believe you." "I didn't expect you to. Not yet." Eleanor pressed the envelope into Margaret's hands. "Read this. Then meet me at this address tomorrow at noon." She handed over a business card. "Bring identification. Bring anything your mother might have kept from those years. Photos, letters, anything." "Why should I trust you?" Eleanor smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment for decades. "Because I'm the only person standing between you and the family that's about to try to destroy you. Charles Whitfield, your half-brother, has been running the company since Theodore fell ill. He knows about the will, and he will do everything in his power to make sure you never see a penny." She turned and walked back to her car. "Wait," Margaret called out. "Why me? Why now?" Eleanor opened the driver's door and looked back. "Because Theodore Whitfield spent his entire life regretting that he let your mother go. He kept a photograph of her in his desk for 54 years. He hired private investigators to track you. He knew about your marriage, your son, your struggles." She paused. "He knew you deserved better, and in the end, it was the only gift he could give you." She got in the car, started the engine, and drove away. Margaret stood alone in the parking lot, holding an envelope that smelled faintly of old paper and secrets. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rick. "Forgot to mention, I need the Honda back by Saturday too. It's technically a dealership asset. You understand." Margaret looked at the text. She looked at the envelope in her hands. She looked at the faded Honda Civic, the car she'd driven for 19 years, while her husband built his empire on her silence. Something shifted in her chest. Not the crack from before. Something different, harder, colder. She opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. A young woman, her mother, maybe 20 years old, standing on the steps of a mansion. Beside her stood a handsome young man in a sailing jacket. They were laughing. They looked in love. On the back, in faded ink, "Victoria and Teddy, Newport, 1970. The summer everything changed." There was also a letter, typed on heavy cream paper. To my daughter Margaret, whom I have never met, but have loved from afar for 54 years. Margaret read the letter standing in the parking lot, cars passing by, the world going on around her, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She finished reading and folded the letter carefully back into the envelope. Then she pulled out her phone and deleted Rick's text without responding. She got into her Honda, the one they wanted to take from her, and started the engine. She had until Friday to save her mother. She had until tomorrow to learn if any of this was real. She had $100 in her pocket and $43 in the bank, and 54 years of being told she wasn't enough. But for the first time in her life, Margaret Chen Whitfield also had something else. She had a name that mattered, and she was going to make them remember it. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She sat in her Honda in the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart, reading Theodore Whitfield's letter over and over, until she had memorized every word.
I watched you from a distance, my daughter. I saw you marry a man who didn't deserve you. I saw you sacrifice your dreams for his ambitions. I saw you become invisible, the way your mother became invisible when my family cast her out. I am sorry. I am sorry for 54 years of cowardice. This is all I can give you now. A name, a fortune, and the truth you were never told. At 6 a.m., Margaret drove to a truck stop and used their bathroom to wash her face. She looked at herself in the mirror. The same tired eyes, the same gray roots she couldn't afford to color anymore. The same woman who had accepted crumbs for 28 years. But something was different now. There was a hardness in her jaw she hadn't seen before, a stillness in her gaze. She changed into the cleanest clothes she had in her overnight bag, black slacks and a white blouse she usually wore to church. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. At 11:45, she pulled up to the address on Eleanor Blackwood's card. It was a brownstone in Back Bay, Boston, the kind of building Margaret had only ever seen from the outside. She parked her rusted Honda between a Porsche and a Tesla and tried not to feel like a trespasser. Eleanor opened the door before Margaret could knock. "You came. Good. I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't." "What changed your mind?" Margaret thought about Rick's text, the dealership asset, the $100. The way he'd said, "Good girl," like she was a dog that had finally learned to sit. "I have questions," Margaret said, "and I have nothing left to lose." Eleanor smiled. "That's the best position to negotiate from. Come in." The inside of the brownstone was all dark wood and leather chairs. Eleanor led Margaret to a study lined with law books. A thick file sat on the desk, marked with a red tab. "Sit down. This is going to take a while." Margaret sat. Her hands were steady, but her heart was racing. "Let me start with what I know," Eleanor said, settling into the chair across from her. "In 1970, your mother was 20 years old. She had just immigrated from Hong Kong and was working as a live-in housekeeper for the Whitfield family in Newport. Theodore Whitfield III was 22, home from Yale for the summer. They fell in love. My mother never talked about this." She wouldn't. She signed a non-disclosure agreement. If she ever spoke about the Whitfields, she would lose everything, including any chance of you having a normal life. Margaret's throat tightened. She was protecting me. She was surviving. There's a difference. Eleanor opened the file. When your mother became pregnant, Theodore wanted to marry her. His mother, Constance Whitfield, refused. She told Victoria that if she didn't disappear, she would have Theodore committed to a psychiatric facility. She would ruin him. She would make sure the baby, you, was taken away and placed in foster care. That's insane. That's old money, Margaret. They don't play by the same rules. Eleanor pulled out a document, yellowed with age.
Victoria signed this agreement in September of 1970. She received $30,000 and a one-way bus ticket to Ohio. She agreed to never contact the Whitfields again. She agreed to never tell you who your father was. Margaret stared at her mother's signature. Small, shaky, written by a terrified young woman with no options. She was 20 years old, Margaret whispered. She was alone in a foreign country. She did what she had to do, and she kept that secret for 54 years. Eleanor leaned forward. But Theodore never forgot her. He never married. He never had other children. He spent his entire life building an empire and regretting the one thing he couldn't buy back, the family he lost. If he regretted it so much, why didn't he find us? He did find you, 10 years ago.
He hired investigators, tracked you to Ohio, learned about your marriage, your son, your life. Eleanor paused. He also learned about Rick, the affairs, the financial abuse. He wanted to intervene, but I advised him against it. Margaret's head snapped up. You told him not to help me? I told him that if he showed up unannounced, claiming to be your father, it would destroy your life. You were still married. You were still trying to make it work. The truth would have shattered everything. Everything shattered anyway. Yes, but now you're free. Eleanor pulled out another document. This is Theodore's will. He rewrote it 6 months ago, when he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He left everything to you. 60% controlling interest in Whitfield properties, his personal accounts, his homes in Newport, Manhattan, and the south of France. Total estimated value, $4.2 billion. The number hung in the air. Margaret couldn't process it. It was too big, too impossible. There has to be a catch. There is. Charles Whitfield IV, Theodore's nephew. He's been running the company for the past 3 years, ever since Theodore got sick. He expected to inherit everything. When the will was read yesterday, he was not pleased. What does that mean for me? Eleanor's expression darkened. It means he's already filed an injunction. He's claiming the will is invalid because Theodore was mentally incapacitated when he wrote it. He's also claiming that you're not Theodore's biological daughter, that your mother was lying, that this is all an elaborate fraud. A fraud? I didn't even know about any of this until yesterday. Charles doesn't care about truth. He cares about money, and he has very expensive lawyers who are very good at making problems disappear. Margaret stood up abruptly. She walked to the window and stared out at the street. A woman jogged by with a golden retriever. A man in a suit talked on his phone. Normal people living normal lives. Why are you helping me? Margaret asked, without turning around. What do you get out of this? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. I was in love with Theodore once, a long time ago, before your mother came into the picture. He chose her, and I was devastated. I spent years hating him for it. She paused. But I also watched him destroy himself with guilt. I watched him become a ghost in his own life. And I watched Charles turn the company into his personal piggy bank while Theodore was too sick to stop him. So this is revenge. This is justice. Theodore wanted you to have what was stolen from you, and I'm going to make sure that happens. Margaret turned back to face her. What do I have to do? First, we need to establish paternity. There's a DNA sample on file from Theodore's estate planning. We can compare it to yours and prove biological relation beyond any doubt. And then? Then we go to war. The DNA test happened that afternoon at a private lab Eleanor had on retainer. Margaret sat in a sterile room while a technician swabbed the inside of her cheek. The whole thing took less than 5 minutes. Results will be back in 48 hours, Eleanor said as they walked out. In the meantime, I need you to stay out of sight. Charles has people watching. If he finds out where you are, he'll try to intimidate you into signing away your rights.
I'm not signing anything.
Good, but he doesn't know that yet. Eleanor handed her a keycard. I have a guest suite at the Four Seasons. You'll stay there until the results come back. Don't use your credit cards, assuming you have any that still work. Don't contact anyone from your old life. And whatever you do, don't talk to the press. The press? The story broke this morning. Mystery Heir claims Whitfield fortune. They don't have your name yet, but it's only a matter of time. Margaret took the keycard. It felt impossibly light in her hand. What about my mother? I can't just leave her at sunrise. The billing office said,
I've already handled it. Your mother's account is current. I've arranged for her to be moved to a private facility in Brookline, the best memory care center in the state. She'll be safe. Margaret's eyes burned. Why would you do that? Because Theodore asked me to. 3 years ago, when he first got sick, he gave me a list of things to do when you were found. Protecting Victoria was at the top. Eleanor put a hand on Margaret's shoulder. He never stopped loving her, Margaret, and he never stopped loving you. For the first time in 2 days, Margaret let herself cry. Not the broken sobbing from the dealership parking lot, but something quieter. Something that felt almost like hope. The Four Seasons suite was bigger than Margaret's entire house. She stood in the doorway for a full minute, afraid to touch anything. The bed alone probably cost more than her annual salary. She showered for the first time in 2 days. She ordered room service, a club sandwich and a pot of tea, and nearly choked when she saw the $47 price tag. Then she remembered that she might be worth $4 billion, and the absurdity of it made her laugh until she cried again. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rick. Heard you're making trouble. Whatever scheme you're running, it won't work. I know people, Maggie. Real people with real power. Don't embarrass yourself. Margaret stared at the message. 2 days ago, those words would have crushed her. She would have apologized, backed down, made herself small. Instead, she typed back, It's Margaret, and you have no idea what's coming. She blocked his number before he could respond. The next morning, Eleanor called at 7 a.m. We have a problem. Charles is holding a press conference at noon. He's going to publicly denounce you as a fraud before the DNA results even come back. Can he do that? He can do whatever he wants. He's the acting CEO. But if we let him control the narrative, it's going to be much harder to fight him in court. What do you suggest? I suggest we beat him to it. I've arranged an interview with the Boston Globe for 10 a.m. They're willing to hold the story until after you speak, but I need you to be ready. Can you do this? Margaret looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Same tired eyes, same gray roots. But that hardness in her jaw was still there, stronger than before. I can do this. Good. I'm sending a car. And Margaret, wear something that makes you feel powerful. Charles is going to underestimate you. Let him. The interview happened in a private room at the Globe's offices. The reporter was a woman named Sarah Chen, no relation, who specialized in corporate scandals. She was sharp, skeptical, and exactly the kind of person Margaret needed on her side. Mrs. Brennan, Chen Whitfield, Margaret corrected. It was the first time she'd said the name out loud. It felt strange on her tongue, but also right. Ms. Chen Whitfield, let's start with the obvious question. Why should anyone believe you're Theodore Whitfield's daughter? Because a DNA test will prove it within 24 hours. And because I have a letter from Theodore himself, written 6 months ago, explaining everything. "Can I see the letter?" Margaret handed it over. Sarah read it slowly, her expression unreadable. "This is remarkable, if it's real." "It's real. I didn't ask for any of this, Ms. Chen. 3 days ago, I was a night shift supervisor at a nursing home. My husband had just taken everything I had and thrown me out on the street. I was 54 years old with $43 to my name." Margaret's voice was steady, but her hands were trembling slightly. "I didn't grow up rich. I didn't grow up knowing who my father was. I grew up watching my mother work 3 jobs to keep us fed. So when you ask why anyone should believe me, my answer is, because I have nothing to gain by lying. I've already lost everything once. I know what rock bottom looks like. I'm not afraid of it anymore." Sarah studied her for a long moment. "Charles Whitfield is calling you a con artist." "Charles Whitfield has been embezzling from the company for years. I have documentation." That got Sarah's attention. "What kind of documentation?" "Financial records showing unauthorized transfers to offshore accounts. Properties sold below market value to shell companies he controls. Board members paid to look the other way." Margaret leaned forward. "Theodore Whitfield built an empire. Charles is burning it down to pay for his gambling debts and his yacht collection. I'm not the fraud here, Miss Chen. I'm the one trying to save what's left." The interview lasted 2 hours. By the time it was over, Sarah Chen looked like she'd just found the story of her career. "This is going to be big," Sarah said as Margaret was leaving. "You know that, right? Once this publishes, your life will never be the same." "My life was never going to be the same anyway. At least now I get to choose what happens next." Charles Whitfield's press conference was a disaster. By the time he took the podium at noon, the Globe had already published Sarah's story online. Reporters shouted questions about the embezzlement allegations. Board members, who had been planning to stand behind Charles, suddenly developed scheduling conflicts. Margaret watched it all on the television in her hotel suite. She watched Charles's face turn red, then white, then red again. She watched him stammer through non-answers. She watched his expensive lawyers huddle together, looking increasingly panicked. Eleanor called as the press conference was falling apart.
DNA results are in early. You're a match. 99.97% probability that Theodore Whitfield was your biological father.
Margaret closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, alone and pregnant, signing away her future for $30,000. She thought about Theodore, watching from a distance, never able to reach out. She thought about the 54 years of silence, of secrets, of what-ifs. What happens now? Now we file a motion to dismiss Charles's injunction. With the DNA evidence and the financial documentation, we have a strong case. But Margaret, I need to warn you. Charles isn't going to give up. He's already hired a private investigator to dig into your past. He's going to look for anything he can use against you. Let him look. I've spent my whole life being invisible. I know how to survive scrutiny. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about Rick. Margaret's blood went cold. What about him? Charles's people have already contacted him. They're offering him money to testify that you're mentally unstable, that you've always been delusional, that you've talked about being secretly wealthy your whole marriage. That's a lie. Of course it's a lie, but Rick doesn't care about truth. He cares about money, and Charles is offering him a lot of it. Margaret thought about Rick, the man she'd trusted for 28 years, the man who had taken everything she had and left her with nothing. How much? $500,000. Margaret laughed. It was a bitter sound. He sold me out for $100.
$500,000 must feel like winning the lottery.
He hasn't signed anything yet. There's still time to—
No,
Margaret's voice was sharp.
let him do it. Let him go on record saying I'm crazy. Because when this is over, when I have control of the company, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Richard Brennan is.
Margaret, revenge is satisfying, but it's not a legal strategy.
It's not revenge. It's accountability. Margaret stood up and walked to the window. The city sprawled out beneath her. Millions of people living millions of lives, none of them knowing that everything was about to change. For 28 years, I let people walk over me. I let Rick take my money. I let his family treat me like hired help. I let myself believe that I didn't deserve better.
She turned back to face Eleanor, even though Eleanor couldn't see her through the phone.
That woman is dead now. The woman standing here, the woman Theodore Whitfield believed in enough to leave everything to. She doesn't back down. She doesn't apologize. And she doesn't let people like Charles and Rick win.
There was a long pause on the other end of the line.
Theodore would have been proud of you,
Eleanor said finally.
I'll call you when we have a court date.
The line went dead. Margaret stood alone in her hotel suite, surrounded by luxury she still couldn't quite believe was hers. In 48 hours, she had gone from sleeping in her car to standing on the precipice of a $4 billion empire. But she knew this was just the beginning. Charles would fight. Rick would lie. The press would dig into every corner of her life, looking for dirt. She picked up the photograph from Theodore's letter. Her mother, young and beautiful, laughing with a man who had loved her enough to spend 54 years trying to make things right.
I won't let them win, Mom, Margaret whispered. Not this time.
Her phone buzzed. A new text, from a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Whitfield, this is Charles. I think we should talk. Name your price and walk away. This doesn't have to get ugly. Margaret read the message 3 times. Then she typed her response. My price is everything, and it's already mine. She hit send and set the phone down. Let him come. Let them all come. She had spent 54 years learning how to survive on nothing. Now she was going to learn how to fight with everything. And the first lesson was this: never let them see you flinch. Charles Whitfield didn't wait long to respond. 3 hours after Margaret's text, Eleanor called with her voice tight.
He's escalating. Charles just filed an emergency motion to freeze all Whitfield assets pending the resolution of the inheritance dispute. If the judge grants it, you won't have access to a single penny.
Can he do that?
He's claiming Theodore was coerced into writing the will. He's saying you and I conspired to manipulate a dying man.
Eleanor paused.
Margaret, he's also named your mother as a co-conspirator.
Margaret's grip on the phone tightened.
My mother has Alzheimer's. She doesn't even know what year it is half the time. Charles doesn't care. He's trying to paint a picture of a decades-long con. The immigrant housekeeper who seduced the heir, waited 50 years, then sent her daughter to collect. That's insane.
That's litigation. Welcome to the big leagues. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at Suffolk County Superior Court. Eleanor spent the next 4 days preparing Margaret for what she called the performance of her life. The judge is Patricia Harmon. She's fair, but she's old school. She believes in evidence, not emotion. Charles is going to try to make you look like a gold digger. Your job is to stay calm, stay factual, and let the documents speak for themselves. What if the documents aren't enough? Then we call witnesses. I have 3 former board members willing to testify about Charles's embezzlement. I have Theodore's personal physician ready to confirm he was mentally competent when he wrote the will. And I have something else.
What?
Eleanor pulled out a small leather journal. Theodore's diary. I found it in his safe deposit box after he died. He wrote about you, Margaret. For years, he wrote about watching you from afar, about the guilt he carried, about his hopes for your future. She handed Margaret the journal. Read the entry from March 15th, 2020. Margaret opened to the marked page. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Today I learned that Margaret's husband has been having an affair for 3 years. My investigators showed me photographs. I wanted to fly to Ohio, to confront him, to tell Margaret the truth about everything. Eleanor stopped me. She said it wasn't time yet. She said Margaret needed to find her own strength first. I pray she finds it before that man destroys her completely. I pray she knows, somehow, that she is loved, that she has always been loved. Margaret's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. He knew about Rick. He knew everything, and he did nothing, because he was afraid of making things worse. Eleanor's voice softened. He wasn't a perfect man, Margaret. He made terrible mistakes, but he loved you the only way he knew how. From a distance. Yes, and he spent his whole life paying for that cowardice. Margaret closed the journal. I want to read at the hearing. I want the judge to hear his words. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. The night before the hearing, Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay awake in the hotel suite, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario in her head. At 2 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered anyway. Hello? Maggie. Rick's voice, slurred with alcohol. Maggie, we need to talk. It's Margaret, and no, we don't. Don't hang up, please. He sounded desperate, pathetic, nothing like the man who had thrown money at her in the dealership. I made a mistake, okay? I know that now. Jessica, she's not what I thought. She doesn't care about me. She only cared about the money. Sounds familiar. That's not fair. I loved you, Maggie. For a long time, I really did. You loved having someone to clean your house and manage your books and never ask for anything in return. That's not love, Rick. That's convenience. Silence on the other end. Then, they're offering me money. Charles Whitfield's people. $500,000 to testify against you. I know. Eleanor told me. I haven't signed anything yet. Margaret sat up in bed. What do you want, Rick? I want us to make a deal. You're about to be worth billions, right? What's a couple million to you? Pay me off, and I'll refuse to testify. I'll even sign an affidavit saying you're the most stable, honest person I know. Margaret laughed. It was a cold sound, nothing like her old laugh. You want me to pay you to tell the truth? I want you to pay me to help you. There's a difference. No, Rick, there isn't. Margaret stood up and walked to the window. The city was still awake, lights blinking in 1,000 windows. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to testify. You're going to say whatever Charles pays you to say. And then I'm going to win anyway. And when I do, I'm going to make sure everyone knows that Richard Brennan, the man who built his dealerships on his wife's savings, sold his integrity for $500,000. You wouldn't. I would. I will. And Rick, when the IRS starts looking into those unreported cash deals you've been running for the past decade, remember this conversation. Remember that you had a chance to walk away clean, and you chose to bet against me. She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something else, something that felt like power. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. Margaret dressed in a navy blue suit Eleanor had bought for her. Simple, professional, nothing flashy. She pulled her hair back in a neat bun and put on the pearl earrings her mother had given her for her 30th birthday. "You look like a CEO," Eleanor said when she picked her up.
I feel like I'm going to throw up.
"Good. Use that energy. Channel it into focus." The courthouse was swarming with reporters. Someone had leaked the hearing date, and now every news outlet in New England wanted a piece of the story. Margaret kept her head down and followed Eleanor through the crowd, ignoring the shouted questions. "Ms. Whitfield, is it true you were a cleaning lady?" "Margaret, how does it feel to go from rags to riches?" "Do you have any comment on Charles Whitfield's allegations?" Eleanor pushed open the courthouse doors. "Don't engage, don't react, just walk." The courtroom was smaller than Margaret expected. Charles Whitfield was already there, seated at the defendant's table with a team of 5 lawyers. He looked up when Margaret entered, and their eyes met for the first time. He was handsome in a cruel way. Sharp features, silver hair, the kind of tan that came from winters in the Caribbean. He smiled at her, a predator's smile.
"So, you're the waitress," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I expected someone more impressive." Margaret didn't respond. She walked to the plaintiff's table and sat down next to Eleanor. "Don't let him bait you," Eleanor whispered. "That's what he wants." "I know." Judge Patricia Harmon entered at exactly 9 a.m. She was a small woman in her 60s, with silver hair and glasses that made her look like a stern librarian. She settled into her chair and surveyed the courtroom. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the estate of Theodore Whitfield III. Mr. Pemberton, you represent the petitioner?" Charles's lead attorney stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. Arthur Pemberton for Charles Whitfield IV. "And Ms. Blackwood, you represent the respondent?" "Yes, Your Honor. Eleanor Blackwood for Margaret Chen Whitfield, biological daughter of Theodore Whitfield." "Alleged biological daughter," Pemberton interrupted. "That's precisely what we're here to dispute." Judge Harmon raised an eyebrow. "We'll get to that, Mr. Pemberton. Please proceed with your opening statement." Pemberton was good. Margaret had to admit that. He painted a picture of a grieving family, blindsided by a con artist, a scheming lawyer, and a forged will. He talked about Theodore's declining mental state, his vulnerability, his isolation. He suggested, without quite saying it directly, that Eleanor had manipulated a dying man for her own gain. "This is not a case about inheritance," Pemberton concluded. "This is a case about elder abuse, about a conspiracy to steal a family's legacy, about a woman who appeared out of nowhere with a convenient story and a suspiciously timed DNA test, expecting to walk away with $4 billion. Margaret felt Eleanor tense beside her. But when it was her turn to speak, Eleanor was calm. "Your Honor, what Mr. Pemberton has just described is a fantasy, a desperate attempt by Charles Whitfield to hold on to an empire he has been systematically looting for years." She stood and approached the bench. "The facts are simple. Theodore Whitfield and Victoria Chen had a relationship in 1970. Victoria became pregnant. The Whitfield family paid her to disappear. Theodore spent the rest of his life regretting that decision." She placed a stack of documents on the judge's bench. "These are Theodore's personal journals, spanning from 1971 to 2024. They document his knowledge of Margaret's existence, his attempts to track her over the years, and his explicit intention to leave his estate to his only biological child." "Those journals could have been fabricated," Pemberton objected. "They were verified by a forensic document examiner. The paper, the ink, the handwriting, all authentic, all dating back decades." Eleanor didn't miss a beat. "We also have Theodore's DNA on file from his estate planning.
Margaret submitted to a test 3 days ago. The results confirm a 99.97% probability of paternity. She placed another document on the bench. And finally, we have financial records showing that Charles Whitfield has transferred over $47 million from company accounts to offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands over the past 3 years. This isn't a case about elder abuse, Your Honor. This is a case about theft. And Charles Whitfield is afraid that Margaret will expose him. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically. Charles's face went from confident to furious in a split second. "That's slander!" Charles shouted, rising from his seat. "Those records are confidential!" "Sit down, Mr. Whitfield," Judge Harmon commanded, "or I'll have you removed." Charles sat, but his eyes never left Margaret. The hatred in them was so intense she could feel it like heat. "I'm going to call a brief recess," Judge Harmon said. "When we return, I want to hear from Ms. Chen Whitfield directly." The recess lasted 15 minutes. Margaret spent it in a small conference room with Eleanor, trying to calm her racing heart. "You're doing fine," Eleanor said. "Better than fine. Charles is rattled. His lawyers didn't expect us to have the financial records." "Where did you get them?" "A former board member who was tired of looking the other way. He contacted me after the Globe story ran." Eleanor smiled grimly. "Charles has made a lot of enemies over the years. People are ready to talk." When court resumed, Margaret took the witness stand. Pemberton approached her like a shark circling wounded prey. "Ms. Chen Whitfield, or should I call you Mrs. Brennan?" "Chen Whitfield is fine." "Let's talk about your marriage. You were married to Richard Brennan for 28 years, correct?" "Yes." "And during that marriage, would you say you had a stable financial situation?" "We were comfortable. Until recently." "Until recently," Pemberton smiled. "Isn't it true that 3 days ago you had $43 to your name?" "Yes." "And isn't it true that you've been estranged from your son for over a year?" Margaret's jaw tightened. "We've had some difficulties." "Difficulties. Interesting word." Pemberton paced slowly. "Isn't it also true that you've never held a management position? That your highest job title was night shift supervisor at a nursing home?" "Yes." "So you have no business experience, no financial training, no education beyond high school." Pemberton turned to face the judge. "And yet you expect us to believe that Theodore Whitfield, a man who built a $4 billion empire, would leave everything to you?" "He left it to me because I'm his daughter." "A daughter he never met. A daughter he never contacted. A daughter who conveniently appeared 3 days after his death with a lawyer and a DNA test." "I didn't know he existed until last week." Margaret's voice was steady. "I grew up thinking my father was a man who abandoned my mother. I had no idea about the Whitfields, about the money, about any of this." "How convenient." "It's the truth." Pemberton leaned in close. "The truth is that you're a 54-year-old woman with nothing. No money, no prospects, no future. And suddenly, miraculously, you discover you're the heir to a fortune. What are the odds of that, Miss Chen Whitfield?" Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the $100 bill. "You want to know about odds, Mr. Pemberton? 3 days ago, my husband of 28 years threw this at me. He called it a severance package for 5 years of mediocrity. He told me I was worthless. He stole my life savings and gave them to his mistress." She held up the bill for the courtroom to see. "I kept this, not because I needed the money, but because I needed to remember. I needed to remember what it felt like to be treated like nothing, to be erased." She looked at Charles. "Your client thinks he can do the same thing. He thinks he can throw money at lawyers, make me disappear, pretend I don't exist." She set the bill on the witness stand. But I do exist. I'm Theodore Whitfield's daughter. I have his blood, his DNA, his name. And I have something Charles will never have. What's that? Pemberton asked, clearly thrown off his rhythm. I have nothing left to lose. Margaret turned to face the judge directly. Your Honor, I'm not here for the money. If this inheritance destroyed my life, I would walk away tomorrow and never look back. But Theodore Whitfield spent 54 years carrying a burden of guilt. He wrote about it in his journals. He dreamed about it. He died with my name on his lips. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. I'm here because a man I never met believed in me. He saw me struggling, saw me suffering, and he chose to give me a chance. I don't know if I deserve $4 billion. I don't know if anyone deserves that. But I know I deserve the truth. And I know Charles Whitfield has been lying to everyone, the board, the shareholders, this court, for years. She pointed at Charles. Ask him about the $47 million. Ask him about the properties in the Caymans. Ask him why he's so desperate to make me disappear. She paused. I think you'll find the answers very interesting. The courtroom was silent. Even Pemberton seemed at a loss for words. Judge Harmon studied Margaret for a long moment. Then she turned to Charles. Mr. Whitfield, would you like to respond to these allegations? Charles stood up slowly. His composure was cracking. Margaret could see it. The perfect facade was starting to crumble. These are baseless accusations from a desperate woman. I've dedicated my life to this company.
My uncle trusted me to. Your uncle wrote you out of his will, Eleanor interrupted.
6 months ago, the same week he learned about the offshore transfers. That's a lie. I have the original will right here. Eleanor held up another document, dated September 15th, 2024. Theodore specifically states that he is removing Charles Whitfield from the line of succession due to, and I quote, gross financial misconduct and betrayal of family trust. Charles's face went white. Where did you get that? Theodore gave it to me, before he died. He knew you would try to contest it. He knew you would try to destroy his daughter the same way your grandmother destroyed her mother. Eleanor walked toward Charles slowly. He prepared for everything, Charles. Everything except forgiving you. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters were shouting. Charles was screaming at his lawyers. Judge Harmon was banging her gavel. Order! Order in this court! It took 5 minutes to restore calm. When the room was finally quiet, Judge Harmon removed her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. I've heard enough for today. I'm denying the emergency motion to freeze assets. The DNA evidence is conclusive. The will appears valid. And frankly, Mr. Whitfield, the financial allegations against you are deeply troubling. Charles opened his mouth to object, but Pemberton grabbed his arm. I'm scheduling a full hearing for next month to resolve the remaining inheritance disputes. In the meantime, Ms. Chen Whitfield will have limited access to estate funds for living expenses and legal fees. She looked at Margaret. And Mr. Whitfield, I'm ordering an independent audit of all Whitfield Properties financial records for the past 5 years. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. Margaret sat frozen in her chair as the courtroom emptied around her. She had won. Not everything, not yet, but she had won the first battle.
Eleanor touched her shoulder. You did it. You actually did it.
I couldn't have done it without you.
Yes, you could have. That speech at the end, that wasn't something I taught you. That was pure Margaret.
Eleanor smiled.
Theodore would have been proud.
Charles stormed past them on his way out, surrounded by his lawyers. He stopped just long enough to lean close to Margaret's ear. This isn't over, he hissed. You think you've won something? I will destroy you. I will burn this company to the ground before I let a waitress sit in my chair." Margaret met his gaze without flinching. "I've been called worse by better men, Charles. You'll have to try harder." He stalked away. Margaret watched him go, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Victory. But as she left the courthouse, pushing through the crowd of reporters and photographers, she knew this was only the beginning. Charles would regroup. He would find new angles of attack, and somewhere out there, Rick was preparing to testify against her. The war wasn't over. It was just getting started, and Margaret Chen Whitfield was ready to fight. The victory lasted exactly 72 hours. Margaret was in Eleanor's office reviewing financial documents when the call came. Eleanor's face changed as she listened, the color draining from her cheeks. "When?" Eleanor asked. "How bad?" She hung up and looked at Margaret with an expression that made Margaret's stomach drop. "Charles held a press conference this morning. He's released a video." "What kind of video?" Eleanor turned her laptop around. On the screen was a news broadcast, and in the center of the frame was Rick. He was wearing his best suit, the one Margaret had bought for their 25th anniversary. He looked directly into the camera with practiced sincerity. "I was married to Margaret Chen for 28 years, Rick said on the video. "I loved her. I tried to help her, but she was never stable. She had delusions of grandeur, constantly talking about how she deserved more, how she was meant for bigger things. When I heard about this Whitfield claim, I wasn't surprised. This is exactly the kind of fantasy she would construct." Margaret felt her hands go cold. "She was obsessed with wealthy families," Rick continued. "She would read about them in magazines, cut out articles, create scrapbooks. I found journals where she wrote about being secretly rich, about hidden inheritances. I thought it was harmless. I thought she would grow out of it." He paused, wiping his eyes. "I blame myself. I should have gotten her help years ago." The news anchor appeared on screen. "Mr. Brennan has provided documentation to support his claims, including what he says are journal entries written by Margaret Chen Whitfield, describing fantasies about wealthy benefactors." Margaret grabbed the laptop. "Those aren't my journals. I never wrote anything like that." "I know," Eleanor said quietly, "but he's manufactured them, and right now, every news outlet in America is running this story." Margaret's phone started buzzing. Text messages, voicemails, notifications flooding in. She saw her son's name flash across the screen. "Danny." She answered immediately. "Danny, I can explain." "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Her son's voice was tight with anger. "Dad just went on national television and said you're mentally ill. Reporters are calling me. My boss is asking questions. I have 3 clients who want to know if my mother is a con artist." "None of it is true, Danny. Your father is lying." "Then why is he saying it? Why would he go on TV and humiliate himself like that?" "Because Charles Whitfield is paying him $500,000. Silence on the other end. Then, "Jesus Christ, Mom, this is insane. All of this is insane." "I know it sounds crazy, but I need you to trust me. I need you to believe me." Another long pause. "I don't know what to believe anymore. I need time to process this." "Danny, I'll call you later, Mom. I need time." The line went dead. Margaret stared at the phone in her hand, feeling something break inside her chest. Her son, her only child, the person she had sacrificed everything for. He didn't believe her. Eleanor was watching her carefully. "Margaret, I'm sorry, but we need to focus. Charles is trying to destroy your credibility before the full hearing. If he succeeds—" "I know." Margaret's voice was hollow. "If he succeeds, I lose everything. We need to fight back.
We need to prove those journals are forged. How? Rick had 28 years to create whatever evidence he wanted. He knows my handwriting. He knows my habits. He knows everything about me. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her phone. I know someone, a forensic document specialist. If those journals are fake, she'll find proof.
And if she doesn't? Then we find another way. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Charles wants to play dirty? Fine. Let's show him what dirty really looks like. The forensic specialist was a woman named Dr. Patricia Vance, a former FBI analyst who now consulted on high-profile fraud cases. She arrived at Eleanor's office that afternoon with a briefcase full of equipment. The journals Rick provided to the press, Dr. Vance said, spreading photographs across the conference table. I've analyzed the paper, the ink, the handwriting patterns, and the content structure. And? Margaret leaned forward. They're sophisticated forgeries, very sophisticated, but there are inconsistencies. She pointed to one of the photographs. See this? The ink used on pages dated from 2015 wasn't commercially available until 2019. It's a subtle detail, but it's conclusive. Margaret felt a wave of relief. So we can prove they're fake. We can prove the physical documents are problematic, but proving Rick created them is harder. We need more direct evidence. Eleanor was already thinking. What about the timeline? Rick claims Margaret wrote these journals over years. But if we can show she was working double shifts on the dates he claims she was at home writing. I kept my work schedules, Margaret said suddenly. Every paycheck, every timesheet. I saved them for tax purposes. They're in a storage unit in Ohio. Can you get them? I can try, but Rick probably already thought of that. He might have. Her phone rang. Unknown number again. She answered. Mrs. Brennan? A woman's voice, young and nervous. This is Jessica Lane. Margaret's grip on the phone tightened. What do you want? I need to talk to you, in person. It's about Rick. Why would I believe anything you have to say? Because I have proof that he forged those journals. I watched him do it. Jessica's voice cracked. And because he's going to destroy me next if I don't get out. Margaret looked at Eleanor, who was listening intently. Eleanor nodded. Where do you want to meet? Jessica suggested a coffee shop in Cambridge, somewhere public, somewhere safe. Margaret arrived an hour early and sat in the back corner, watching the door. Jessica walked in at exactly 3 p.m. She looked nothing like the confident woman Margaret had seen at the dealership. Her makeup was smeared, her hair unwashed, and there was a bruise on her left cheek that she'd tried to cover with foundation. She slid into the booth across from Margaret. Thank you for meeting me. You said you have proof. I do. Jessica pulled out her phone with shaking hands. 3 weeks ago, Rick asked me to help him with a project. He said it was for tax purposes, that he needed to recreate some old documents. I didn't think anything of it. She pulled up a video and turned the phone toward Margaret. On the screen, Rick was sitting at a desk, carefully copying handwriting from a sample onto a blank journal page. I recorded it because I thought it was weird, Jessica said. I didn't know what he was doing. Not until I saw the news today. Margaret watched her husband methodically forge evidence designed to destroy her. His face was calm, focused. He was humming. Why are you showing me this? Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Because I'm scared. Rick isn't who I thought he was. When the money from Charles started coming in, he changed. He started talking about getting rid of loose ends. He looked at me when he said it. You're a loose end. I know too much. I've seen his real books, the ones he doesn't show the IRS. I've heard his phone calls with Charles. I know where the bodies are buried. Jessica leaned forward. I can testify. I can tell the court everything. But I need protection. I need you to help me disappear before Rick realizes what I've done. Margaret studied the woman across from her. This was the person who had stolen her husband, the person who had laughed at her in the dealership parking lot. Why should I help you? Because I can bring them both down, Rick and Charles. I have recordings, documents, emails, everything. Jessica grabbed Margaret's hand desperately. I know you hate me. You have every right to hate me. But I'm not your enemy. I was a pawn just like you. The only difference is I figured it out faster. Margaret pulled her hand back. Send me everything you have, every document, every recording, and then I'll decide what to do with you. You'll help me? I'll think about it. Jessica nodded frantically. She pulled out a flash drive and pressed it into Margaret's palm. It's all here, everything. Please, I don't have anyone else. She stood up and hurried out of the coffee shop, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to see Rick following her. Margaret sat alone with the flash drive in her hand. She thought about karma. She thought about justice. She thought about the woman who had giggled while Rick threw money in her face. Then she put the flash drive in her pocket and called Eleanor. I have something you need to see. The contents of the flash drive changed everything. There were emails between Rick and Charles dating back 6 months, long before Theodore's death. They had been planning this, waiting for the old man to die so they could swoop in and steal the inheritance. Charles recruited Rick, Eleanor said, scrolling through the documents. He knew about your connection to Theodore before you did. He's been preparing for this fight for years. How is that possible? Charles had his own investigators. He found out about Victoria, about you, about everything. He just couldn't do anything about it while Theodore was alive. Eleanor pointed to a specific email. Look at this. Charles offered Rick $2 million to keep you distracted, to make sure you never discovered the truth about your father. Margaret read the email. Rick knew I was Theodore's daughter. He knew for 6 months. And he never told you. He kept you trapped in that marriage, kept you poor and dependent because Charles was paying him to. The betrayal was staggering. 28 years of marriage, and the last 6 months had been a calculated prison designed to keep her from claiming her birthright. He didn't just steal my money, Margaret whispered. He stole my time. He stole 6 months I could have had with my father. Theodore tried to reach out to you in September, Eleanor said quietly. He sent a letter to your home address. Rick intercepted it. How do you know? Eleanor pulled out another document from the flash drive. A scanned image of an unopened envelope addressed to Margaret Chen Whitfield, with Theodore's return address in Newport. Rick kept a digital copy, probably as insurance against Charles. Eleanor's voice was hard. Your father wanted to meet you before he died, Margaret. Rick made sure that never happened. Something shifted in Margaret's chest. The grief and anger and hurt fused together into something different, something cold and sharp and absolutely certain. I want to destroy him, Margaret said. Not just Rick, both of them. I want them to lose everything. That's what we're going to do. Eleanor stood up. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. With this evidence, we can have Charles removed as CEO immediately. And as for Rick, I'll handle Rick personally. The board meeting convened at 10 a.m. in the Whitfield Properties headquarters in Boston. Margaret walked in wearing a black Armani suit that Eleanor had insisted she buy. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup minimal, her expression unreadable. Charles was already there, surrounded by his lawyers. He looked up when Margaret entered, and for a moment his confident mask slipped. What is this about? He demanded. This meeting wasn't on the schedule. Emergency session, Eleanor said, taking her seat at the table. Called by the majority shareholder. She's not the majority shareholder yet. The inheritance is still being contested. Actually, it's not. Eleanor placed a thick document on the table. Judge Harmon signed off this morning. The DNA evidence was conclusive. The will was authenticated, and your emergency motion was denied with prejudice. She slid the document across the table to Charles. Margaret Chen Whitfield is now the legal owner of 60% of Whitfield Properties. Congratulations on your new boss, Charles. The color drained from Charles's face. That's impossible. My lawyers said, your lawyers lied to you. Probably because they knew about your offshore accounts and didn't want to go down with the ship. Eleanor smiled coldly. Speaking of which, she pulled out another file and began distributing copies to each board member. This is a detailed accounting of the $47 million Charles has embezzled from this company over the past 3 years. Property sales below market value, kickbacks from contractors, phantom consulting fees paid to shell companies he controls. The board members flipped through the documents with growing alarm. Margaret watched their faces shift from confusion to shock to barely concealed fury. This is fabricated, Charles sputtered. She manufactured this evidence. It came from your own files, Charles. Downloaded by Jessica Lane, your co-conspirator's girlfriend. Eleanor's voice was ice. She's currently in protective custody, prepared to testify about everything she witnessed. Jessica would never. Jessica was smart enough to realize you were going to dispose of her when she stopped being useful. Just like you disposed of everyone else who got in your way. Margaret stood up for the first time. Every eye in the room turned to her. 3 weeks ago, I was a night shift supervisor at a nursing home. My husband had taken everything I owned. I had $43 and nowhere to go. She walked slowly around the table, making eye contact with each board member. Charles Whitfield looked at me and saw a victim. He thought he could crush me the way his grandmother crushed my mother 54 years ago. She stopped directly behind Charles's chair. He was wrong. Charles spun around to face her. You don't know what you're doing. This company is complicated. It requires experience, expertise. It requires someone who won't steal from it. Margaret leaned down close to his ear. I've spent 30 years caring for people at the end of their lives, Charles. I've held hands with dying men and women who had nothing. I've learned what matters and what doesn't. She straightened up and addressed the board. What matters is integrity. What matters is honoring the legacy Theodore Whitfield built. What doesn't matter is the opinion of a man who betrayed his own family for money. She turned back to Charles. You're fired. You can't do this. I have rights. I'll sue. You'll be too busy defending yourself against criminal charges. Eleanor stood up. The district attorney has already received a copy of this file. They're opening an investigation into embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. I imagine they'll want to discuss your relationship with Richard Brennan as well. Charles's lawyers were gathering their things, distancing themselves from their client with practiced efficiency. One of them, a younger associate, actually walked out of the room without looking back. Security will escort you out, Eleanor continued. You have 15 minutes to collect personal items from your office. Anything related to company business stays here. 2 security guards appeared at the conference room door. Charles looked at them, then at the board members who refused to meet his eyes, then at Margaret. You think you've won, he said quietly. You haven't. I have resources you can't imagine, connections you'll never understand. This isn't over. Yes, Margaret said, it is. She nodded to the security guards. They stepped forward and took Charles by the arms. You're making a mistake, Charles shouted as they pulled him toward the door. I built this company. I kept it running while Theodore was dying. You're nothing. You're a nobody. You're... The door closed behind him, cutting off his words. The conference room was silent. Margaret stood at the head of the table, surrounded by board members who were looking at her with a mixture of fear and respect. I know this has been a difficult morning, she said. I know many of you have questions about my qualifications, my plans, my vision for this company. She sat down in the chair Charles had vacated, the CEO's chair.
I don't have all the answers yet. I'm still learning. But I know this. Theodore Whitfield built something remarkable. Something that provides jobs for thousands of families, that supports communities across New England, that matters. She looked around the table. I won't let anyone destroy that. Not Charles, not his lawyers, not anyone. She paused. I'm asking for your help, your expertise, your patience. Together, we can save this company. Together, we can honor Theodore's legacy. One by one, the board members nodded, some reluctantly, some with genuine enthusiasm. But they nodded. Good, Margaret said. Now let's get to work. The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the time it was over, Margaret had learned more about real estate holdings, liability structures, and quarterly projections than she had in her entire life. Her head was spinning, but she refused to show it. Eleanor walked her out to the elevator. You were incredible in there. Theodore chose well. I don't know what I'm doing, Eleanor. Half of what they said went over my head.
That's why you have advisors. That's why you have me.
Eleanor pressed the elevator button.
The important thing is that you showed strength. You showed you can't be pushed around. The rest will come. The elevator doors opened. Margaret stepped in, then turned back. What about Rick? What happens to him now? The DA is building a case. With Jessica's testimony and the evidence from the flash drive, he's looking at serious charges. Fraud, conspiracy, possibly obstruction of justice. Will he go to prison? If there's any justice in the world, Eleanor paused. But Margaret, there's something else. Rick has been calling the office all morning. He wants to talk to you. Why? I don't know, but I suspect he's realized his allies are abandoning him, and he's looking for a life raft. Margaret thought about it. The man who had thrown money at her, the man who had stolen her savings, her time, her connection to her dying father. Set up a meeting, she said. Are you sure that's wise? I'm sure it's necessary. Margaret pressed the button for the lobby. I have something I need to return to him. The elevator doors closed on Eleanor's worried face. Margaret reached into her jacket pocket and touched the $100 bill she still carried everywhere. It was time to complete the circle. Rick chose the meeting location himself, a steakhouse in downtown Boston, the kind of place where deals were made and broken over whiskey and rare fillets. Margaret suspected he thought the familiar territory would give him an advantage. He was wrong. She arrived 15 minutes early and took a table in the center of the room. Not a corner booth where they could whisper, the center, where everyone could see, where everyone could hear. Rick walked in at exactly 7 p.m. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his tie crooked, and there were dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide. The confident salesman's swagger was gone, replaced by something desperate and hungry. He slid into the seat across from her. Maggie, thank you for meeting me. It's Margaret. Right, Margaret. He tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. You look different. Good different. Success suits you. What do you want, Rick? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. I made a mistake. A lot of mistakes. Charles, the testimony, the journals. I was scared. He promised me money, protection. I didn't think. You thought plenty. You thought for 6 months while you intercepted letters from my dying father. You thought while you drained my savings account. You thought while you planned exactly how to destroy me." Rick flinched. "How do you know about the letters?" "Jessica told me everything." His face went pale. "Jessica? She wouldn't." "She did.
She gave me recordings, documents, emails, everything you and Charles planned together."
Margaret's voice was calm, steady. "Did you know she was recording your phone calls? Every conversation about forging the journals? Every discussion about keeping me trapped in our marriage?" Rick's hands were shaking. "She's lying. She's trying to save herself. She's saving herself by telling the truth. Something you've never been able to do." A waiter approached, but Margaret waved him away. She wasn't here to eat. "What do you want?" Rick asked, his voice cracking. "Money? I can get money. Charles paid me." "I don't want your money, Rick." "Then what? The dealerships? I'll sign them over, all 5 of them. Just tell me what you want." Margaret reached into her jacket and pulled out the $100 bill. She smoothed it on the table between them. Rick stared at it. "What is that?" "Don't you recognize it? This is the severance package you gave me."
$100 for 28 years of marriage. She pushed it toward him. "I kept it. Every day since you threw it at me, I've carried it in my pocket. I wanted to remember."
"Maggie, Margaret, I was angry. I was stupid. I didn't mean—" "You meant every word." Margaret's eyes were cold. "You called me dead weight. You said I was mediocre. You told me to get a job as a janitor at your firm." "I was showing off for Jessica. It was performance. It was truth. Your truth." Margaret leaned forward. "Here's mine. I was never dead weight. I was the foundation you built your entire life on. Every sacrifice I made, every dream I gave up, every dollar I saved, you used all of it. And when I had nothing left to give, you threw me away." Rick's eyes were wet now. Whether the tears were real or performance, Margaret couldn't tell. She didn't care. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "No, you're not. You're scared. There's a difference." She picked up the $100 bill and folded it carefully. "The DA is going to charge you with fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Your dealerships are going to be seized as part of the investigation. And when the IRS finishes looking into your books, you'll be lucky to avoid federal prison. You can stop it. You have influence now. You could—" "I could what? Save you?" Margaret laughed. "Why would I do that?" "Because we were married for 28 years. Because I'm the father of your son. Because somewhere, underneath all of this, you still remember who we used to be." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. She thought about their wedding day, how young they had been, how full of hope. She thought about Danny's first steps, Rick's proud smile, the way he used to hold her hand in the car. Then she thought about the dealership, the $100, the text message that ended everything. "I do remember who we used to be," she said finally. "But that person is gone. You killed her. And the woman sitting in front of you now, she doesn't owe you anything." She placed the $100 bill in his hand, curling his fingers around it. "Here's your severance package, Rick. Consider it a bonus for 28 years of mediocrity." She stood up. "I hear they're hiring night shift janitors at the courthouse. You might want to look into it." She walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Rick sat alone at the table, holding the $100 bill, surrounded by the curious stares of wealthy diners who had just witnessed his destruction. He didn't move for a very long time. 3 months later, Margaret stood at the window of her new office in the Whitfield Properties headquarters. The Boston skyline stretched out before her, glittering in the late afternoon sun. So much had changed. Charles Whitfield had pleaded guilty to 12 counts of fraud and embezzlement.
He was currently serving 8 years in federal prison, his assets seized, his reputation destroyed. The Cayman accounts had been recovered, the stolen money returned to the company. Rick's trial was scheduled for next month. Jessica had turned state's witness in exchange for immunity, providing testimony that guaranteed his conviction. The dealerships had been sold at auction, the proceeds going to pay his legal debts. He was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Cleveland, awaiting a fate he had never imagined. And Margaret? Margaret had become someone she never knew she could be. There was a knock at the door. Eleanor entered, holding a thick folder. "The quarterly reports. Profits are up 15% since you took over." "That's not my doing. That's the team." "The team follows your lead." Eleanor set the folder on the desk. "You've done something remarkable, Margaret. 6 months ago, this company was bleeding money and hemorrhaging trust. Now the shareholders are happy, the employees are loyal, and the press can't stop writing about the nursing home CEO who saved a dynasty." Margaret turned away from the window. "I don't care about the press." "I know. That's why they love you," Eleanor smiled. "There's someone here to see you, by the way. He's been waiting in the lobby for an hour." "Who?" "Your son." Margaret's heart stuttered. She hadn't spoken to Danny since that terrible phone call, the one where he said he didn't know what to believe. He had sent a brief text after Rick's arrest. "I'm sorry, Mom," but nothing more. "Send him in." Danny walked in slowly, hesitantly. He was 31 now, with his father's height and his mother's eyes. He looked nervous, uncertain, like a child who had broken something precious and didn't know how to fix it. "Mom?" "Danny." They stood on opposite sides of the office, a decade of distance between them. "I saw the news about Dad," Danny said quietly. "I knew he had problems, but I didn't understand how bad it was."
"None of us did."
"That's not true." Danny shook his head. "You knew. You lived with it for 28 years, and I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it."
"You were his son. He was different with you."
"He was still the same person," Danny's voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me."
Margaret felt something shift in her chest. The anger she had carried toward her son, the hurt and disappointment, it was still there, but smaller now, less important. "Come here," she said. Danny crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her. He was crying, she realized. Her grown son, the boy who had inherited his father's pride and his mother's stubbornness, was sobbing into her shoulder like he was 5 years old again. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry." Margaret held him tight. "It's okay. We're going to be okay." They stood like that for a long time, mother and son, rebuilding something that had been broken for years. When Danny finally pulled back, wiping his eyes, Margaret led him to the couch in the corner of her office. "Tell me about your life," she said. "Tell me everything I've missed." They talked for 3 hours. Danny told her about his job, his apartment, the woman he was thinking about proposing to. Margaret told him about Theodore, about the letters, about the father she had never known. "I wish I could have met him," Danny said. "My grandfather. He knew about you. He wrote about you in his journals." Margaret pulled out Theodore's diary and opened it to a marked page. July 2019. He wrote, "My grandson graduated from law school today. I watched the ceremony from across the street. He has Victoria's smile. I wish I could tell him how proud I am." Danny read the entry with trembling hands. "He was there? At my graduation?" "He was there for a lot of things." Watching from a distance, wishing he could be closer. Why didn't he ever reach out? Because he was afraid. Because he thought we were better off without him. Because by the time he found the courage, your father had already made sure his letters never reached me. Danny set down the journal. Dad destroyed so much. Yes, but he didn't destroy us. Margaret took her son's hand. We're still here. We're still family. That's what matters. The next morning, Margaret drove to Brookline to visit her mother. The memory care facility was everything Eleanor had promised. Clean, quiet, staffed by people who actually seemed to care. Victoria was sitting by the window when Margaret arrived. Good days were rare now, but today her eyes were clear. Margaret. My Margaret. Hi, Mom. Margaret sat down and took her mother's hand. The skin was thin, papery, but the grip was still strong. You look different, Victoria said. You look powerful. I feel different.
Is it true, what the nurses told me? About Theodore? Margaret nodded.
It's true. He left me everything, Mom. The company, the houses, the money, all of it. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then tears began to slip down her wrinkled cheeks. I wanted to tell you. For 54 years I wanted to tell you the truth. But I was scared. They said they would take you away from me if I talked. I know, Mom. Eleanor told me everything. He loved me, Victoria whispered. Theodore loved me. He wanted to marry me. Did they tell you that? Yes. His mother called me a gold digger, a Chinese whore trying to trap her son. Victoria's voice hardened with old anger. I was 20 years old. I was alone. I had nowhere to go. So I took their money and I ran. You did what you had to do. I gave up. Victoria shook her head. I should have fought. I should have stayed. Maybe then nothing would have been different. The Whitfields had too much power. You would have lost me, lost everything. Margaret squeezed her mother's hand. You made the right choice, Mom. You gave me a life. You gave me a chance. But you suffered. That man, Rick. Rick is going to prison. Charles is already there. The people who hurt us are paying for what they did. Victoria looked at her daughter with something like wonder. You did that? My little girl? Your little girl grew up, Margaret smiled. She learned how to fight. Victoria reached up and touched Margaret's face. Her fingers were cold, but gentle. Theodore would be proud of you. I'm proud of you. Thank you, Mom. They sat together by the window, watching the spring sunlight filter through the trees. Victoria began to hum the same song from before, the one in Cantonese that Margaret had never recognized. What is that song, Mom? Victoria stopped humming. It's a lullaby. My mother used to sing it to me in Hong Kong, and I sang it to you when you were a baby. I don't remember. You were very small. Victoria closed her eyes. It's about a bird that flies very far from home. It thinks it will never find its way back. But then it sees a light in the window, and it knows. It knows it was never really lost. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. That's beautiful. You were never lost, Margaret. Not really. You just needed to find your light. Margaret stayed with her mother until the sun set. When she finally left, Victoria was sleeping peacefully, a small smile on her face. 6 months later, Margaret stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Whitfield estate in Newport. 300 guests filled the room: board members, employees, community leaders, and press. It was the first annual Theodore Whitfield Memorial Gala, a fundraiser for immigrant families in need of legal assistance. Margaret had founded it in her father's name, a way to honor his memory and make amends for the harm his family had caused. My father was not a perfect man, Margaret said, her voice carrying across the silent room.
He made mistakes. He carried guilt that nearly destroyed him. But he also carried hope. Hope that one day his family would heal. Hope that the woman he loved would be vindicated. Hope that his daughter would find her way home. She paused, looking out at the faces watching her. I grew up with nothing. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. I spent 30 years being told I wasn't enough. Not smart enough, not pretty enough, not worthy enough. I believed it. I let myself become invisible. She touched the pearl earrings her mother had given her, the only jewelry she wore. But invisibility can be a gift. When no one sees you, you learn to watch. You learn to listen. You learn to survive. And when the moment comes, when you finally step into the light, you know exactly who you are. She looked toward the back of the room, where Danny stood with his arm around his fiancée, where Eleanor sat, with a rare smile on her face. I am Margaret Chen Whitfield. I am the daughter of an immigrant housekeeper and the heir to a billion-dollar empire. I am a mother, a CEO, and a survivor. And I am proof that your beginning does not determine your end. The applause was thunderous. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the caterers had cleaned up, Margaret walked alone through the halls of the Whitfield estate. Theodore's estate. Her estate now. She stopped in front of a painting she had commissioned, a portrait of Theodore and Victoria together, based on the photograph from the letter. They were young and beautiful and in love, frozen in a moment before everything fell apart. I wish you could see this, Margaret said softly. I wish you could know that it worked, that your faith in me wasn't misplaced. She touched the frame gently. I'm going to take care of everything you built. I'm going to make sure your legacy matters. And I'm going to raise my grandchildren, when they come, to know who you were, both of you, the whole truth. She took a deep breath and stepped back. Rest now, both of you. I've got it from here. She walked out of the estate and into the cool night air. The stars were bright overhead, scattered across the sky like diamonds. She thought about the bird in her mother's lullaby, the one that flew far from home and found its way back. She wasn't that bird anymore. She wasn't searching for her light. She had become the light. Her phone buzzed. A text from Danny. Proud of you, Mom. See you Sunday for dinner? She typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Love you. She got into her car, a modest sedan, not the luxury vehicle Eleanor kept urging her to buy, and started the engine. Tomorrow there would be meetings and decisions and challenges. There would be problems to solve and fires to put out, and people who doubted her. There would be hard days and lonely nights, and moments when she wondered if she was good enough. But tonight, Margaret Chen Whitfield drove through the darkness with her windows down and her heart full. She had been discarded. She had been erased. She had been thrown away like garbage by people who thought she was worthless. And she had risen. Not because she was lucky, not because she was special, but because she had learned the most important lesson of all. Rock bottom is not a grave. Rock bottom is a foundation. And on that foundation, she had built an empire. The waitress had become a queen. The invisible woman had become undeniable. And the girl who was told she was nothing had proved, once and for all, that she was everything. Margaret Chen Whitfield smiled as the city lights faded behind her. The story was complete. The circle was closed. And the rest of her life was just beginning.